The clock on the wall struck 11:30 p.m. when Hannah Miller left her best friend's birthday party in Annapolis, Maryland. The sweltering summer night enveloped the Bayside city in humid heat, with streetlights casting a faint golden glow over the quiet streets. A friend distinctly remembered waving goodbye through the window as Hannah stepped out, her light-colored dress standing out in the thick darkness. The 19-year-old opened the door of her silver sedan. The engine roared to life, then faded into the distance toward the highway leading into the Patuxent forest. Her parents waited in their small house a few miles away, expecting the familiar headlights of their daughter's car to turn into the driveway, but in vain. What happened in the less than 1 hour that followed would haunt Annapolis for years to come. Before diving into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated on the latest cases. On the summer night of June 16, 2007, Annapolis, Maryland, was steeped in the oppressive heat typical of the coastal region. The air was thick, and the occasional breeze from the Chesapeake Bay wasn't enough to dispel the stifling atmosphere. On the narrow streets, dim streetlights cast a yellowish glow onto the sidewalks, accompanied by the hum of cicadas and the occasional sound of a late-night car. It was an ordinary, peaceful night, until the name Hannah Miller vanished from the embrace of those who knew her. Hannah, 19, was a freshman at the University of Maryland, a girl with a kind smile and an outgoing personality, beloved by her friends. That evening, she attended her best friend's birthday party at an apartment in downtown Annapolis. The party was cozy, with friends gathered, laughing and talking lively. No one could have imagined that the last glimpse of Hannah would become a haunting memory. At 11:30 p.m., she stood up, slung her bag over her shoulder, flashed a smile, and said goodbye before quickly heading out the door. A friend vividly recalled Hannah turning back, her small hand waving, her voice ringing out, "See you tomorrow." That was the last time they heard her voice. Hannah got into her silver sedan, turned on the headlights, and drove off. The light from her car swept across the dark parking lot before blending into the sparse traffic of the summer night. A neighbor nearby, while closing the curtains before bed, caught a glimpse of her car heading toward the highway leading to the Chesapeake Bay. The red taillights gradually disappeared around a curve, leaving behind an impenetrable darkness. In the Miller family's small home, not far away, Hannah's parents still believed their daughter would return as usual. The clock struck midnight, then 1 a.m., then 2 a.m. But the front door remained silent. Her mother repeatedly called her daughter's phone, each time hearing only the endless ringing. Her father sat motionless in an armchair, eyes glued to the lit window overlooking the street, as if waiting for a familiar figure to appear. As the night grew late, their worry turned to panic. They called Hannah's friends, all of whom confirmed she had left the party around midnight. No one knew where she went. No one saw her afterward. The house was shrouded in suffocating silence, broken only by the sound of the mother's footsteps pacing on the wooden floor, mixed with the steady ticking of the wall clock. The living room light stayed on all night, like a desperate beacon. When the faint light of dawn broke over the Chesapeake sky, both parents knew something terrible had happened. At 6 a.m., exhausted and trembling, they picked up the phone to call the police, their voices shaking as they admitted their daughter was missing. That was the moment fear became reality. From that point, the disappearance became official, and Annapolis was no longer the peaceful city it once was. The call was transferred to the Annapolis police station just minutes later. A patrol car was immediately dispatched to the Miller family's quiet street. When the doorbell rang, Hannah's parents stepped out, their faces pale and eyes red from a sleepless night. The living room was bathed in light from the ceiling fixture, but the atmosphere was thick and heavy. Lieutenant Robert Hayes, the on-duty investigator that morning, sat down in an armchair, opened his notebook, and began taking the first notes. He asked the family to recount everything that had happened. The mother, choking back sobs, said Hannah left the birthday party at 11:30 p.m., and it should have taken less than 15 minutes to drive home, but no one had seen her since. The father slowly added that they had tried calling her all night. Her phone rang but went unanswered, and after midnight, it was completely off. Hayes underlined the phrase, "No contact since 11:30 p.m., and looked up at them, his eyes signaling that this was no ordinary case. That same morning, the police split into teams. One group returned to the apartment where the party was held, while another scoured the short route from there to Hannah's home. Her friends were questioned one by one. All confirmed that Hannah left the party in good spirits, showing no signs of sadness or anger. A close friend vividly recalled Hannah slinging her bag over her shoulder, turning back to smile and saying, "See you tomorrow," before quickly heading to the parking lot. Those light-hearted words now felt like a permanent farewell. On the main road leading to Hannah's house, police received two significant witness statements. A late-night pedestrian reported that around 11:40 p.m., he briefly saw a girl in a light-colored top passing an intersection. Due to the distance and dim streetlights, he couldn't be certain it was Hannah, but the detail was noted in the case file. A gas station worker a few miles away recalled that around 11:45 p.m., a silver sedan drove by. He remembered it because only a few cars passed during that hour, and the car's model and color matched the one Hannah drove. However, due to the obstructed view and blurry surveillance footage, he couldn't see who was inside. Based on these fragments, investigator Hayes began constructing a preliminary timeline. 11:30 p.m. Hannah left the party around 11:40 p.m. A witness saw a female figure in a light-colored top at an intersection. 11:45 p.m. A silver sedan passed the gas station. If she followed the route, she should have been home within 5 to 10 minutes. But by midnight, as her parents sat waiting in the lit room, no familiar engine sound echoed in the driveway. The gap, after 11:45 p.m., became a chilling boundary. From that point, all traces of Hannah vanished completely. For a 19-year-old college student, with no reason to disappear voluntarily without contacting her family, Hayes stared at the freshly written lines in his notebook. Sensing this was no longer an ordinary missing person case, Annapolis remained calm on the surface, but in the newly opened case file, a mystery had taken shape. One that would haunt the city for years to come. While Lieutenant Hayes was still piecing together the preliminary timeline, the Annapolis Police Command decided to escalate the disappearance to an emergency situation. Hannah, only 19, was a well-mannered student with no history of running away or major conflicts with her family. Nearly 10 hours had passed since contact was lost, and every minute could be the difference between life and death. On the morning of June 17th, the entire force was mobilized. Police dogs were deployed along the roads from the party apartment to Hannah's home, their noses weaving through roadside bushes, pausing at suspicious spots, but moving on when no strong scent was found. A helicopter circled overhead, its infrared cameras scanning the Chesapeake Bay shoreline, where waves lapped against the rocky barriers. Rescue divers were also called in, donning gear and oxygen tanks to search the waters near the pier, where strong currents could easily sweep anything to the bottom. By noon, the search expanded. Over 100 volunteers, from college students to the miller's neighbors, joined the effort. They split into small groups, holding maps and marking areas they'd covered. Calls of Hannah echoed through the Patuxent forest, bouncing off tall trees and fading into the wind. Hannah's father, exhausted from the sleepless night, insisted on joining, leading a group alongside police, clutching his daughter's sweat-dampened photo. Her mother stayed at the coordination center, tears streaming down her face each time a group returned empty-handed. The Annapolis community was stunned by Hannah's disappearance. Within a day, posters with her smiling face were plastered everywhere, on telephone poles, at grocery stores, and on school bulletin boards. Local churches opened for prayer, residents passed around flyers, and teenagers quickly shared Hannah's image on social media, urging anyone with unusual sightings to contact the police. For a town accustomed to tranquility, a young woman vanishing from familiar streets felt like a collective nightmare. But for 3 consecutive days, all efforts yielded nothing. Not a single personal item of Hannah's was found, no shoe, no note, no phone signal. the most promising spots, a damp forest patch where the dogs lingered unusually long, or a river bend searched by divers, returned only cold emptiness. Even Hannah's silver sedan, which should have been the most critical clue, remained undiscovered at that point. The police had to report to the family that all investigative leads were still unanswered. As night fell over Annapolis, posters with the young woman's face swayed in the breeze, a reminder that a mystery had taken root in the heart of the community. In the Miller family's home, the living room light burned bright, no longer just a signal of waiting, but a desperate beacon for the entire city. Hannah was gone, and despite hundreds of people sweating in the search, no one knew where she was. 2 days after the search campaign swept through Annapolis with no results, a breakthrough emerged. On the third morning, as a police team patrolled a narrow road along the Chesapeake Bay, where dense trees and sparse nighttime traffic made it secluded, they spotted a familiar object glinting in the sunlight. It was Hannah Miller's silver sedan, parked askew on the roadside, its tires caked with dirt, as if it had been there for days. The team immediately halted, cordoned off the scene, and stretched yellow tape across the quiet road. Silence hung heavy, broken only by the distant sound of waves. A preliminary inspection showed the car door was loosely locked, with no signs of forced entry or unusual scratches. This suggested Hannah might have exited the car herself, or if someone forced her, they didn't need to break in. Inside the trunk, Hannah's purse was intact, student ID, wallet, a few small books. Her phone lay on the passenger seat, battery dead, screen black. There were no signs of a struggle, no shattered glass, no bloodstains. It was as if the car had been parked normally, and its owner vanished into thin air. For investigator Hayes, this discovery brought both hope and complications. The car's presence provided a new focal point for the investigation, but the lack of evidence of violence left all theories hanging. If Hannah was attacked, why were there no traces? If she left voluntarily, why abandon all her belongings, including her phone? The forensic team meticulously collected fingerprints and fibers, but by day's end, nothing stood out. News of the car's discovery spread quickly through Annapolis. The Miller family was brought to the scene, the mother's eyes lifeless as she saw the familiar silver sedan that should have brought her daughter home safely, now sitting alone on the desolate road. The father clenched his fists, trying to suppress his despair. A crowd of neighbors and friends gathered behind the yellow tape, whispering theories. Some believed Hannah was surely abducted, others feared she'd had an accident and was lost in the woods. On the evening news, footage of the car aired, with a reporter standing at the scene, voice grave. Hannah Miller's car has been found, but the 19-year-old's whereabouts remain a mystery. No signs of violence, no explanations, only questions. How did Hannah vanish? Annapolis, once peaceful, was now cloaked in a dark cloud. The silver sedan didn't provide answers, but deepened the unease, turning the disappearance from a case into a chilling mystery that plunged the community further into fear. Police sealed off the quiet road where Hannah's silver sedan was found, determined to scour the scene more thoroughly. This time, they didn't just open the car doors or collect items inside. They used rulers, flashlights, and cameras to document every minute detail on the ground. After hours of observation, a significant find emerged. Right next to Hannah's tire marks was another set of tracks, running parallel for about 4 meters before disappearing into the brush. These tracks were wider and deeper, likely from a different vehicle, possibly an SUV or pickup truck. Investigator Hayes crouched down, pressing his finger into the hardened dirt, noting in his book, second vehicle, wider tire tracks, stopped close to Hannah's car. A few steps away, a forensic officer picked up a small torn piece of dark fabric, caked in mud. The tattered scrap, possibly torn from someone's shirt or pants during a struggle, was sealed in a plastic evidence bag and labeled. Though too small to immediately identify its material or origin, it became one of the few rare clues in an otherwise eerily clean scene. Meanwhile, another team revisited the gas station a few miles away, where an employee had reported seeing a silver sedan pass by on the night Hannah disappeared. The station's security cameras were old, with poor image quality, but after reviewing the footage, they spotted a dark-colored vehicle passing around 11:45 p.m., close to when Hannah left the party. The blurry image showed only the high frame of what could be an SUV. The license plate was nearly unreadable, with just a few smudged characters visible under the streetlight. When pieced together, a hypothesis began to form. Hannah may have been followed by another vehicle. The SUV tire tracks found next to her car on the secluded road, combined with the blurry camera footage of a dark-colored vehicle passing the gas station, reinforced the suspicion that her disappearance was not simply a case of a girl leaving on her own. Instead, it was possible she had been intercepted or forced out of her car under duress. However, challenges quickly arose. The evidence was too scarce and unclear. The tire tracks on the ground were not sharp enough to match a specific vehicle. The torn piece of fabric was too small to analyze for DNA or material, with the technology available at the time. The camera footage, though valuable, was so blurry that neither the license plate nor the driver could be identified. All these were fragmented clues, raising questions but proving nothing. In a brief press conference that day, the police spokesperson admitted, "We have some new details from the scene, but we cannot yet confirm them as definitive evidence." The investigation continued. This statement left the Miller family clinging to a sliver of hope, while sinking deeper into despair due to the lack of concrete progress. The mother gripped her daughter's poster tightly, choking back tears as she asked, "If there was another vehicle, where was my little girl when that car disappeared?" In the community, rumors began to spread. Some whispered about a stranger lingering around the Bay Area. Others mentioned a black SUV often seen at night. It was all just hearsay, but fear gradually enveloped Annapolis. The once peaceful road was now spoken of as a place of lurking danger, and the most haunting question lingered. If Hannah was truly intercepted here, why didn't anyone hear or see anything more? As night fell again, the yellow tape remained stretched across the quiet road. Hannah's silver sedan was towed to the police garage for further examination, while the tire tracks and the torn fabric were frozen in the report as incomplete pieces of a puzzle. The disappearance seemed to have just cracked open a lead, only to be immediately blocked by a wall of missing evidence, leaving the community in a state of confusion, unsure what to believe. From the faint traces around the silver sedan and the hypothesis of a second vehicle, the police began reviewing a list of people who knew Hannah. One name stood out: Derek Coleman, a 28-year-old mechanic at a small garage on the outskirts of Annapolis. Coleman had met Hannah a few months earlier when she worked part-time at a convenience store near the garage. Several of Hannah's friends recalled that he frequently stopped by, often trying to strike up conversations and sometimes acting overly familiar. As the police dug deeper, they uncovered Coleman's less-than-clean past. He had been involved in a bar fight in 2005, fined for disorderly conduct. Neighbors described him as hot-tempered, especially when drinking. His record also showed a few citations for speeding at night, though no serious convictions. These details were enough to place him on the list for thorough questioning. Coleman was summoned to the police station 3 days after Hannah's car was found. He appeared calm, wearing a wrinkled shirt, his face expressionless. In the interrogation room, Investigator Hayes asked directly, "Where were you on the night of June 16th? Coleman answered without hesitation that he was at home, watching TV alone until late, then went to bed. When asked if anyone could verify this, he shrugged. "I live alone, so no one." The response was too smooth, almost rehearsed, raising the investigators' suspicions. The police pressed further about his relationship with Hannah. Coleman admitted knowing her, claiming it was just casual acquaintance from the convenience store. When asked when he last saw her, he gave a vague reply. "I don't remember exactly, maybe a few weeks ago." However, one of Hannah's friends stated they had seen him near the birthday party on the night she disappeared, though he didn't enter. This made Coleman's statements inconsistent, yet it all remained at the level of suspicion. There were no fingerprints of his in the car. No DNA evidence, no footage showing him with Hannah. The clues, like the torn fabric, or the second vehicle's tire tracks were still insufficient to link directly to Coleman. During an internal meeting, a young officer exclaimed, "It feels like he's the guy, but we have nothing to hold him." After over 8 hours of questioning, Derek Coleman was released. As he left the station, he glanced back at the reporters waiting outside, flashing an enigmatic smirk. The image was captured and appeared in the local paper the next day with a bold headline, "A New Name in the Hannah Miller Disappearance." But for the Miller family, the police's inability to detain Coleman meant only one thing: the person who might know what happened to their daughter was still out there, and the case remained at a standstill. The news of Derek Coleman's summoning and release did little to lift the gloom hanging over Annapolis. For the Miller family, the sense of helplessness grew heavier. They sat before local TV cameras, faces weary from sleepless nights, eyes red. The mother, voice trembling, told the reporter, "If anyone knows anything, please call us, please call the police. My daughter couldn't have vanished in one night. Someone out there knows what happened." The plea aired during prime time, replayed on multiple news channels, making Hannah's name known across Maryland. The father, though reserved, clutched his daughter's photo and said simply, "We won't stop until we find her." The image spread widely in print and on social media, sparking a wave of sympathy but deepening the despair. In downtown Annapolis, a candlelight vigil was held, drawing hundreds. Small, fragile candles flickered in the wind, arranged in a circle around the square. Hannah's face on a poster stood at the center, surrounded by fresh flowers, cards and notes reading, "Bring Hannah home." The father stood before the crowd, his voice low but resolute, "We won't give up. Hannah is still out there, and we'll keep looking for her." The crowd chanted Hannah's name, the sound echoing through the historic buildings, a testament to the community's solidarity with the family. But as the candles burned out and people quietly left, the void remained, no new leads. Volunteer groups continued their tireless search. They split into small teams with maps, compasses, and first aid kits, combing through remote areas. The dense Patuxent forest was searched multiple times, and the Chesapeake Bay shoreline was thoroughly checked by divers. Days on end, sweat-soaked shirts and mud-caked shoes yielded only meaningless items: an old sneaker, a scrap of cloth, a broken plastic bracelet. All were sent for analysis, and each time the results brought disappointment. Nothing related to Hannah. Police dogs were deployed repeatedly, but the scent trail was too faint, carried away by the sea breeze, lost in the air. On social media, the movement to share Hannah's photo was initially strong, but after weeks with no new developments, shares dwindled. Posters on telephone poles faded under rain and sun, many torn or covered by new ads. At some stores, Hannah's picture in window frames was removed for promotional signs. Annapolis, once a quiet small town, now bore a silent scar. Everyone remembered the disappearance, but no one knew what more to say, only shaking their heads in helplessness. In the Miller household, time seemed frozen. The father visited the police station weekly to ask for updates, knowing the answer would be nothing new. The mother never stopped gazing out the window each night, her desperate eyes fixed on the dark road, as if waiting for the familiar silver sedan to return. Hannah's bedroom remained untouched. Half-read books on the desk, a jacket hung behind the door, a framed photo of smiling friends. Entering the room, the mother would sit motionless for hours, tears falling endlessly. The hopeless days stretched on, and the community's fervor faded into silence. Initially, dozens of volunteers signed up to search, but the numbers dwindled. Hannah's friends returned to their studies, though the haunting memory lingered in their eyes. People stopped discussing theories, as no one had answers. Annapolis quietly carried a shared pain, an invisible crack in its peaceful facade. The initial hope of Hannah's safe return had faded, replaced by the bitter acceptance that the young woman might be gone forever. By December 2007, 6 months after Hannah's disappearance, the Annapolis police held an internal meeting to review the case. A thick report lay spread across the table, but it contained nothing new. Investigators sat in silence, flipping through pages of crime scene photos, faint clues, and disjointed statements. It all confirmed a bitter truth. The Hannah Miller disappearance had not progressed a single step. In year-end news segments, brief crime reports mentioned the case as a sad reminder, quickly overshadowed by other stories. For the media, it was no longer breaking news. For the police, it was a dead-end file. In early 2008, the case was officially moved to the Annapolis Police Archives, labeled a cold case. The file was placed on an old wooden shelf alongside hundreds of unsolved disappearances and murders in Maryland. On the cover, Hannah Miller was soon covered in a thin layer of dust. Passing investigators sometimes paused at the shelf, glanced at the name, and sighed. They knew a cold case rarely saw resolution. Meanwhile, the Miller family refused to let their pain fade into silence. In June 2008, on the first anniversary of Hannah's disappearance, they held a candlelight vigil in Annapolis's Central Square. Friends, neighbors, and a few local reporters attended. The mother, wearing her daughter's old jacket, read a trembling speech. "We don't know where Hannah is, but our hearts still believe she'll come back." Fragile candles flickered in the night breeze, illuminating tearful eyes. Year after year, the vigil became a ritual the Millers maintained, a way to preserve Hannah's memory and urge the community not to forget. Inside their small home, Hannah's room remained untouched. College books sat on the desk, the jacket hung behind the door, the pillow on the bed was washed, but unmoved. The mother often entered, sitting still for hours, as if waiting just a little longer would bring Hannah back. The father took a different approach. He kept every news article about the case, carefully compiling them into a personal file, believing they'd be needed when the police reopened the investigation. From 2009 to 2015, time passed with cold indifference. Annapolis gradually returned to its routine. Posters of Hannah's face faded under the elements, many torn down, leaving only scraps on poles. On social media, "Bring Hannah Home" posts dwindled, replaced by new topics. At the university, new students didn't even know her name. The disappearance, once shaking the community, became a fading memory. For the police, Hannah Miller's file was just another name in a long list. Occasionally, a rookie was assigned to review it as an exercise, only to shelve it again as no evidence opened new leads. The yellowed reports and blurry crime scene photos lay dormant in the dark archive. The case was frozen in the past, untouched and unmentioned, except by the Millers. Still, the pain simmered quietly in the city's heart. Those who joined the 2007 search remembered the emptiness of returning empty-handed. Some neighbors occasionally visited the Millers, leaving flowers at their door, whispering that they still thought of Hannah. But beyond these quiet gestures, the mass mobilization was gone. Annapolis had learned to live with an unsolved mystery. For the Millers, each passing year was a fresh wound. On Hannah's birthday, they made a small cake, lit candles in the dining room, and sat in silence. At Christmas, her seat at the table remained empty. In the cold winter, when snow blanketed the yard, the father stood by the window, his gaze distant, as if expecting a silver sedan to pull up. But all that returned was darkness and silence. By late 2015, nearly 9 years since the disappearance, the Hannah Miller case remained stagnant. For the police, it was a low-priority cold case. For the community, it was a story fading into oblivion. But for the Millers, it was an unhealed wound, an untouched room never locked, and a candle lit every June. Nearly 13 years passed since Hannah Miller's name was buried in the cold case archive. Annapolis had learned to live with the mystery until a September morning in 2020, when fate unexpectedly lifted the veil. A Maryland environmental survey team was studying vegetation in the Patuxent forest, just a few miles from where Hannah's silver sedan was found almost 15 years earlier. Equipped with moisture meters, GPS devices, and soil sample bags, they followed a rarely traveled path when a student intern froze at the sight of a black object among the decayed leaves. Bending down, he found a tattered backpack, its straps torn, fabric faded and caked in damp soil. The backpack was opened on the spot. Inside, though heavily damaged, were identifiable items: a light green jacket, a University of Maryland student ID with a faded photo, but the name Hannah Miller still legible, and a shattered digital camera. The surveyors were stunned. They called the police, and within an hour, the quiet Patuxent forest became an urgent crime scene. The investigation team set up a white tent, stretching yellow tape around the area. Small stakes marked off square meters. Metal detectors scanned the leaf litter, and shovels dug cautiously. Police dogs were brought in, sniffing the area. On the third day of excavation, when a shovel struck something hard under shallow soil, everyone around fell silent. The dirt was carefully brushed away, revealing white bones, discolored by time. No one spoke, only the sound of hurried pencil scratches and camera clicks filled the air. Forensics quickly confirmed the remains were human. The skeleton lay curled, hands bound with rotted but identifiable rope. The clothing had nearly disintegrated into the soil, with only a few fabric scraps remaining. Each item was carefully extracted, sealed, and labeled. Those present knew they stood before the answer to the mystery that had haunted Annapolis for 13 years. Bone samples were sent to the lab. After days of waiting, the DNA results left everyone speechless. It was Hannah Miller. The 19-year-old who left a party with a smile, who sparked a community-wide search, was finally found under a cold, damp layer of earth, just miles from where her car was abandoned. The news was first shared with the Miller family. The mother collapsed upon hearing confirmed, while the father gripped the table's edge, eyes vacant. For them, the fragile hope held for over a decade shattered. As the news spread, Annapolis reeled in shock. Newspapers ran headlines, and TV anchors' voices broke as they read, "After 13 years, Hannah Miller has been found, but only as remains." On social media, Hannah's youthful face reappeared, now alongside "Rest in Peace." Those who attended the 2007 vigil reposted old memories, writing, "We never forgot you." In the Patuxent forest, once a serene haven for birds and rustling winds, now became a place no one wanted to mention. The yellow tape was removed, but the lingering echo remained. People passing that trail shuddered, as if Hannah's death still lingered in the air. The police held a press conference shortly after the forensic results were confirmed. Lieutenant Hayes, now with silver-streaked hair, stood at the podium. His voice was hoarse. "We have found Hannah Miller. This case has officially shifted from a disappearance to a homicide. We will not stop until we find the person responsible." His words caused the crowd below to erupt in a mix of anguish and anger. The community was stunned to realize that the person who led Hannah to her death had evaded justice for 13 years. The Miller family held a memorial service at the local church. The room was packed, candles flickered, and photos of Hannah lined the pews. The mother spoke briefly. "We've found our girl, but not in the way we hoped. From today, we have only one wish: justice." The discovery of Hannah's remains not only closed part of the mystery, but also opened a new chapter in the investigation. The rotted ropes, the torn backpack, the bones beneath the soil, all now became evidence. The case, once forgotten in the cold case archives, flared back to life, pulling the community back into old wounds. Annapolis understood that after 13 years buried in silence, the truth had finally risen from the earth, and it would not rest until the perpetrator was brought to light. The discovery of Hannah Miller's remains in the Patuxent forest brought a case forgotten for over 13 years back to the forefront. The Annapolis police decided to relaunch the investigation and assigned it to a new face. Detective Lisa Howard, a seasoned investigator known for piecing together seemingly disconnected clues. When Howard stepped into the cold case archive, she stared at the dusty, thick file, with Hannah Miller faded on the cover. "It's time to rewrite everything," she said softly, then began with the first lines. Howard reconstructed the entire timeline, arranging every detail from the old file. She started with the party on the night of June 16, 2007. Hannah left at 11:30 p.m., cheerful, showing no signs of distress. Then came the short drive that should have taken 15 minutes to get home, but became a fateful journey. A pedestrian witness reported seeing a female figure in a light-colored top at 11:40 p.m. at an intersection. A gas station worker recalled seeing a silver sedan around 11:45 p.m. Hannah's phone stopped working shortly after, with no further pings near her home, but a final signal detected near the Patuxent forest, the same area where her remains were found 13 years later. This caught Howard's attention. If Hannah's phone went offline near the forest that night, why wasn't it precisely located in 2007? Reviewing technical reports, she found that back then tracking technology was rudimentary, and police relied on broad cell tower estimates spanning miles. In 2020, reanalyzing the old data with new technology showed Hannah's phone was almost certainly in the forest from the start. Howard also compared the new findings with Derek Coleman's 2007 statements. Back then, Coleman claimed he was home alone all night, watching TV until he went to bed. No one could corroborate this, but the police lacked evidence to hold him. Now, with Hannah's remains found in the forest, just miles from where Coleman frequented, his statements grew suspicious. She noted in the file, Coleman no alibi verification, statements inconsistent with new scene. The relaunched investigation forced Howard to revisit every overlooked discrepancy. For instance, the small piece of dark, torn fabric found near the car in 2007 was never tested for DNA due to technological limitations. Now, with modern labs, it could be a key. She ordered it retested immediately. In her first press conference, after taking over, Howard faced the media, her gaze resolute. This is no longer a missing person case. It's a homicide. We have new evidence, and we will work tirelessly to uncover the truth. Her statement not only reassured the Miller family, but also reignited a long-faded spark of hope in the Annapolis community. That night, back at her office, Howard spread out old and new crime scene photos on her desk. The image of Hannah, smiling on her college move-in day, sat next to the excavated bones from the cold earth, weighing heavily on the room. But for Howard, it was why she chose this career, to give a voice to those forgotten. Deep down, she knew the inconsistencies in Derek Coleman's statements were just the beginning. Immediately after deciding to reopen the Hannah Miller case, Detective Lisa Howard requested all old evidence be resealed and sent to Maryland's most advanced lab. The most critical items were the rotted ropes found with Hannah's remains in the Patuxent forest, the muddy fabric scraps from the 2007 scene, and the heavily decayed light green jacket. Many believed that after 13 years, nothing could be salvaged. But Howard trusted modern technology could shift the tide. She closely monitored the forensic process, each step executed with utmost care. Technicians in full protective gear swabbed the ropes, using special chemicals to extract cells from the decayed fabric. Hours passed with eyes glued to microscopes until a technician looked up, smiling. "We've got DNA." The genetic sample was entered into CODIS, the federal criminal DNA database. Everyone waited in tense anticipation, but the results were disappointing. No direct match. The perpetrator had never been arrested or submitted DNA to the system, but Howard didn't falter. She knew of cold cases cracked through genetic genealogy, a new method using expanded databases from civilians, voluntarily submitting DNA to trace relatives. She immediately contacted a private lab specializing in this, sending the DNA sample with an urgent request. The comparison process was complex and lengthy. Experts built a hypothetical family tree from millions of data points, narrowing from thousands to hundreds, then to a few closely matching branches. Generations and connections were mapped on charts. Howard frequently visited the lab, standing for hours by a whiteboard filled with names, trying to envision the invisible link emerging. After weeks, the breakthrough came. The DNA from the ropes and Hannah's clothing matched a distant cousin of Derek Coleman. Specifically, the DNA matched a distant cousin in Pennsylvania, unrelated to Annapolis. This person had never met Hannah, but the genetic similarity confirmed a third-degree relation to the perpetrator. Tracing the family branch, all paths led back to a familiar name: Derek Coleman, the man questioned in 2007 and released for lack of evidence. With this, Suspicion was no longer instinct. Science had spoken. Howard didn't announce the results immediately. In a closed meeting with her team, she spread the family tree on the table, pointing to red lines leading directly to the Coleman lineage. "We have the missing piece," she said. A young officer nodded, eyes both excited and chilled. 13 years ago, it was all suspicion. Now genetic technology had breathed life into a case thought dead. In the next press conference, Howard faced the cameras, her voice firm. "We've made significant progress through DNA and genealogical testing. This case is no longer gathering dust. We will pursue it to the end." She didn't name the suspect, but it was enough to stir the community. Annapolis residents reshared Hannah's image on social media, with tearful comments. "Justice is coming." The Miller family received the news in tears. The mother clutched her husband's hand, sobbing, "If science can speak for our girl, let it tell the whole story." The father, who for years quietly asked police for updates, said only, "We're about to know the truth." In Hannah's room, a small candle on her desk was lit again, not just for remembrance, but to welcome the dawning light of justice. On Howard's desk, beside the yellowed old file, were now colorful DNA charts, endless genetic sequences, and a family tree glowing with highlighter marks. She looked at Derek Coleman's name, circled at the center, and exhaled deeply. "Hannah has spoken," she murmured. From that moment, the investigation's path was clear. Coleman was no longer a shadow from the 2007 night, but a man exposed by science. The DNA match to Coleman's distant relative propelled the Hannah Miller case into a new chapter. But Detective Lisa Howard knew a genetic link alone wouldn't sway a jury. She needed more evidence to build a complete picture and pin Coleman with no escape. So, the team dug into Coleman's entire past, from dusty archive files to overlooked 2007 digital data. What they found wasn't pretty. Coleman had been linked to at least 3 minor assaults before Hannah's disappearance. In 2004, he was cited for a bar fight, attacking a former garage coworker. In 2005, a woman accused him of harassment and a scuffle in a parking lot, but the case was dropped for lack of witnesses. In 2006, he was named in a report for public disturbance, drunk, and damaging property. Each time, Coleman escaped with fines or warnings, never facing serious court. His profile painted a man quick to anger, prone to explosive outbursts, especially when drinking. Howard believed this temperament fit the hypothesis of an attack on Hannah that fateful 2007 night. But she needed something more concrete, and an unexpected lead came from an unlikely source: car insurance records. While reviewing Coleman's financial documents, a young investigator found that his 2007 insurance company had tested a GPS tracking service to lower premiums for consenting customers. To save a few dollars a month, Coleman had agreed to install the device on his SUV. The 2007 GPS records were never explored because investigators were unaware of them. Now, when the insurance company retrieved the old data, it provided a detailed log of Coleman's SUV movements the night Hannah vanished. The cold data was clear: around 11:40 p.m. His SUV was just a few hundred meters from the intersection where a witness saw Hannah 10 minutes later at 11:50 p.m. The GPS logged the vehicle stopping near the Patuxent forest entrance, where Hannah's remains were found years later. When those numbers appeared on the screen, the meeting room fell silent. Howard tapped her fingers on the table, softly saying, "He was there." No longer speculation or hypothesis. The GPS data placed Coleman at the scene. Combined with the DNA on Hannah's ropes, the picture was nearly complete. He had the motive, the violent temperament, and was at the right place at the right time. Howard immediately ordered deeper DNA analysis. Results confirmed the biological traces on Hannah's clothing were 99.999%, likely to match the Coleman lineage, with Derek as the prime candidate. She cross-referenced this with the GPS data, building a detailed timeline: 11:30 p.m. Hannah left the party, 11:40 p.m. Electing witness, saw her at the intersection, 11:45 p.m. Her silver sedan passed the gas station, 11:50 p.m. Coleman's SUV stopped near the Patuxent forest. Minutes later, Hannah's phone went offline. This combination locked together like two puzzle pieces. For years, the case stalled for lack of a link between suspect and scene. Now, DNA and GPS filled that gap. Howard couldn't hide her mix of relief and tension. She knew the investigation had entered a no-turning-back phase. Coleman was no longer a vague shadow in old files, but a named perpetrator. In an internal meeting, Howard stood before a whiteboard, writing 3 words, DNA plus GPS. She underlined them multiple times, her voice firm. This is the key. This is evidence we didn't have in 2007. Now we have science and data to prove he lied. The team sat in silence, but their eyes burned with determination. After over 13 years, justice for Hannah was no longer a distant dream. It was taking shape, page by page. With the 2007 GPS data and genetic analysis pointing directly to the Coleman family, Detective Lisa Howard knew they were close to the finish line. But she also understood that to secure an arrest warrant, they needed one final piece: Derek Coleman's current DNA, directly compared to the sample from Hannah's ropes and clothing. If it matched perfectly, no defense could stand. A covert surveillance plan was launched. The team split into small units, tailing Coleman around the clock. They used old cars to avoid attention, sometimes sitting in a cafe across from his garage, sometimes parked in a dark alley near his home. Every habit was meticulously logged. He left the garage around 6 p.m. daily, stopped at a convenience store for beer, smoked Camel cigarettes constantly, and every Thursday night set out trash bags on his porch. These seemingly trivial details became the key to the plan. During surveillance, the team's atmosphere was tense as a taut string. Everyone knew they were walking a tightrope between success and failure. If Coleman grew suspicious, he could alter his routine, destroy evidence, or worse, flee. Howard instructed the team, "He can't see our shadow. Everything must seem normal, like no one cares about him." The officers nodded, but they felt the crushing pressure, 14 years of waiting for justice, and one small mistake could unravel it all. On the night of February 25, 2021, the opportunity came. Coleman placed 2 trash bags on the curb outside his porch, as he always did. As he turned back inside, a covert team approached, silently collecting the bags and replacing them to avoid suspicion. The vehicle carrying the evidence sped to the lab in tense silence. At the lab, under cold fluorescent lights, each item in the trash was examined: beer cans, fast food containers, greasy wrappers, but most crucially, dozens of Camel cigarette butts with saliva traces. Technicians in gloves separated each sample and fed them into the DNA analyzer. The screen compared the genetic sequence to the data from Hannah's ropes. The room held its breath. Then the text appeared, "Match 100%. An older technician, who had worked on the 2007 evidence, broke into tears. His voice trembled. 14 years. It was him. Howard stood frozen, eyes locked on the printed results. For years, the truth lay buried under dusty files. Now science had pulled it to the surface. Derek Coleman was no longer a suspect. He was the man who led Hannah to her death. The news wasn't yet public, but the Miller family was briefed. Hearing, "We have new evidence," the mother sobbed uncontrollably, while the father sank into a chair, hands covering his face. For them, it was a moment of both pain and relief. Hannah wouldn't return, but justice was finally naming the perpetrator. In Annapolis, rumors buzzed. People whispered about police tailing an old suspect. Everyone was tense, hopeful yet fearful. In cafes, Hannah's old posters were hung again, now with determined eyes. Justice for Hannah. Howard and the state prosecutor met urgently. On the table, she laid out all evidence. Coleman's history of violence, GPS data placing his SUV at the scene, and most crucially, the perfect DNA match from his trash. The prosecutor nodded firmly. "It's enough. Prepare the arrest warrant." The night before the move, Howard gathered her team in the meeting room. She wrote 3 words on the whiteboard: DNA, GPS, behavior. Below was Derek Coleman's name, circled and underlined in red multiple times. She looked into each officer's eyes, her voice resolute, no more doubts. Tomorrow he faces justice. Hannah won't wait another day. The room was silent for a moment, then heads nodded in unison. 14 years of waiting were nearing an end. The killer living freely was about to face undeniable truth. In March 2021, the atmosphere in the Annapolis police station was thick with tense anticipation. After 14 years, the arrest warrant was finally signed, closing a long, arduous chapter of investigation and surveillance. Detective Lisa Howard and her task force prepared for that fateful morning with absolute precision. She repeated multiple times, "No one gives him a chance to escape, but no one acts recklessly. We take him in with silence and truth." Grim nods met her words. Everyone understood that in just a few hours, the man who had haunted the city for over a decade would face justice. At dawn on March 12th, fog still lingered over the Chesapeake Bay as a convoy of police vehicles quietly rolled into the neighborhood where Derek Coleman lived. It was a peaceful residential area, with sloped roof houses, neat white fences, and children often riding bikes along the narrow street. None of them suspected that a murderer had lived comfortably among them for years. As the police cars stopped in front of Coleman's White House, curtains in neighboring homes twitched slightly. Urgent knocks echoed, followed by a commanding shout. Police opened the door now. For a brief moment, silence blanketed the scene, then the door swung open. Coleman appeared, wearing an old t-shirt, hair disheveled, eyes wide with shock. Behind him, his wife and 2 young children stood stunned in the living room, unaware of what was unfolding. Howard stepped forward, holding up the arrest warrant, her voice cold but clear. "Derek Coleman, you are under arrest for first-degree murder in connection with the death of Hannah Miller in 2007. Coleman's face flickered with unease, and he stammered, "No, you've got the wrong guy." But before he could resist, the handcuffs snapped shut on his wrists. The metallic click rang coldly in the misty morning. His wife burst into tears, clutching their children, who sobbed, calling out, "Daddy!" A neighbor standing by the yard, witnessing the scene, could only mutter, "I can't believe it." Police swiftly escorted Coleman outside to the waiting vehicle. Neighbors gathered in growing numbers, their faces etched with shock. To them, Coleman had been an ordinary man, a hard worker at the garage, occasionally helping with tire changes, or chatting at the store. Now that image crumbled in a single morning. A young woman covered her mouth, whispering, "I once left my kid with him for a few minutes." "Oh my God." An elderly man shook his head, voice trembling. "We lived next to a monster and never knew." As the police convoy drove away, dozens of reporters were already on the scene, cameras flashing relentlessly. The news broke instantly. Suspect Derek Coleman, 42, was arrested this morning, 14 years after the disappearance and murder of Hannah Miller. In the Miller family's living room, the mother broke down as the TV showed Coleman being led away. The father sat motionless, eyes closed tightly, hands clenched as if summoning all his strength. It was the moment they had both awaited and dreaded for years, the moment the man who took their daughter's life finally faced justice. Annapolis was shaken. Cafes, offices, and schools buzzed with discussion. Residents were stunned to learn the nice guy they saw daily was a murderer living among them. Many wondered how he could maintain a normal life for 14 years as a husband, father, neighbor, while carrying that dark secret. For the community, this wasn't just an arrest, it was the shattering of trust. The interrogation room at Prince George's County Detention Center felt like a sealed box. Derek Coleman sat across from 2 investigators, wrists still marked by cuffs, his face grim but eyes defiant. He spoke before they could ask, "You've got nothing solid, that DNA could be contaminated. 14 years, who knows who touched that trash?" His voice was hoarse, but each word was calculated. Howard watched from behind the one-way glass, noting every move. She knew Coleman wouldn't confess easily. He had lived with this secret for 14 years, long enough to build a defensive wall. His clinging to contamination only proved he understood the weight of the DNA evidence. Shortly after his arrest, Coleman's family-hired defense attorney arrived. On television, he declared, "My client is accused based on old evidence, unearthed after over a decade." The body was severely decomposed, the crime scene no longer intact. How can anyone conclude with certainty that the DNA wasn't contaminated or mishandled during storage? This argument was quickly picked up by the media, sowing questions in the community. Was justice truly certain, or was this a desperate attempt to close the case? But Maryland's prosecutor, Karen Douglas, struck back. In a press conference, she stated bluntly, "We have DNA found directly on the ropes around the victim's wrists, matching 100% with DNA from Derek Coleman's household trash. This isn't speculation. This is scientific truth." Her bold assertion reassured many, who feared the case might stall, as it did in 2007. In the interrogation room, when shown the DNA comparison, Coleman stubbornly shook his head. "No, you tampered with the evidence. I never saw Hannah again after the last time at the convenience store. If my DNA's there, it was already there." He spoke as if he believed his own lie. But his eyes darted, avoiding the image of the ropes placed before him. The defense attorney tried to prolong the game. He demanded retesting of all evidence, suggesting the wet forest environment could have altered the DNA. He argued that since Hannah's body was decomposed, the exact cause of death couldn't be determined, making a first-degree murder charge difficult. In court, these points were delivered smoothly, as if truth could be blurred by words. But Douglas didn't yield. She presented clearly. The cause of death may be obscured by time, but the truth isn't. The ropes are still there. The victim's clothing is still there. And above all, DNA doesn't appear out of nowhere without direct contact. She looked straight at Coleman, her gaze icy, then turned to the jury. Hannah Miller didn't tie herself up. She didn't bury herself in the Patuxent forest. The person who did is sitting right before you. In the community, the back and forth was followed closely. Some worried the defense might succeed in planting reasonable doubt, but most trusted the science, that the DNA evidence, no matter how challenged, was an unshakable pillar. The Miller family appeared before the press. Tears streaming but voices resolute. "We don't need him to confess. We have the truth." Coleman, in the final interrogation of the day, still insisted, "I'm innocent. I didn't kill Hannah Miller." But his denial, echoing in the empty room, sounded like a feeble whisper against the mounting wall of evidence. On the morning of September 5, 2021, Prince George's County Courthouse was packed from dawn. The stone steps to the main hall were crowded with reporters, TV cameras lined up, and curious residents gathered, buzzing with discussion. For the Annapolis community, this wasn't just a trial. It was the day the truth, buried for 14 years, would finally come to light. Inside the courtroom, silence reigned. The 12 jurors sat in a row, their eyes tense. The Miller family's section was full, with many of Hannah's old friends present, clutching her photos. Among the public, a heavy silence prevailed, broken only by the rustle of papers as the court clerk organized files. When the judge struck the gavel, prosecutor Karen Douglas stood first. She stepped to the center, her voice resounding. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today we are here to hear the truth about a young woman named Hannah Miller. She left a friend's birthday party one summer night in 2007 and never returned. For 14 years, her family waited. For 14 years, this community yearned for justice. And now, science has given us the answer." Douglas reconstructed the case like replaying a film. She described Hannah leaving the apartment at 11:30, the young woman smiling and waving to friends one last time. She mentioned the silver sedan abandoned by the roadside, the phone going offline near the Patuxent forest, and the 2020 excavation of her remains. When the large screen lit up, showing crime scene photos, The rotted ropes, torn jacket, and curled skeleton under the soil, the courtroom fell silent. Hannah's mother sobbed, leaning into her husband, while her father gripped his hands tightly, eyes red but holding back tears. Douglas continued, her voice icy. The DNA on Hannah's ropes matches Derek Coleman's 100%. GPS data from his SUV shows that on the night of June 16, 2007, at 11:50 p.m., his vehicle stopped at the edge of the Patuxent forest, where we later found Hannah's body. Ladies and gentlemen, DNA doesn't lie. GPS doesn't lie. And a young woman doesn't tie herself up or bury herself. The person who did is sitting right here. All eyes turned to Coleman, who sat motionless behind the defense table. In a gray shirt and crooked tie, he tried to maintain a calm facade, but sweat beaded on his forehead. The defense attorney stepped forward, his voice soft, attempting to project calm amid the tension. Ladies and gentlemen, your job isn't to sympathize. Your job is to weigh the evidence. And I ask you to remember, reasonable doubt is enough for a not guilty verdict. He began sowing doubt. The body was heavily decomposed after over a decade, making the cause of death impossible to determine. The DNA, he claimed, could be contaminated or mishandled during storage. The ropes, he argued, might have been touched by others, with no certainty. Only his client was involved. No direct witnesses, no confession. We only have theories, he concluded, locking eyes with the jury. His words echoed through the courtroom, stirring concern among some spectators. But Douglas didn't let the narrative linger. She stepped forward, her voice firm. Yes, the body was decomposed, and yes, we lack a direct witness, but we have what cannot be disputed. DNA directly from Derek Coleman's household trash, perfectly matching the DNA on the ropes. We have GPS data proving he was at the scene, and we have his history of violence from past assaults. Ladies and gentlemen, Hannah Miller didn't vanish on her own. She was murdered. And her murderer is Derek Coleman. Douglas's powerful words sparked a reaction in the courtroom. Some nodded slightly, others clasped hands tightly. The Miller family, though in tears, showed a glimmer of hope in their eyes. For the first time in years, justice felt within reach. Outside the courthouse, reporters broadcast live. The Derek Coleman trial has officially begun, a female reporter said to the camera. The prosecution presents undeniable DNA and GPS evidence, while the defense seeks to cast doubt on their reliability. Annapolis is holding its breath. As the first day of the trial ended, the crowd spilled out, buzzing with discussion. One resident whispered, "He won't get away." Another was cautious, "His lawyer's tough, but DNA doesn't lie." The Miller family emerged, surrounded by friends, faces wet with tears, but eyes brighter than ever. For them the pain remained, but at least Hannah had a voice. On the second day of the trial, the courtroom at Prince George's County Courthouse was packed again. The atmosphere was even tenser than the opening, as everyone knew today would bring direct testimonies. The evidence prosecutor, Karen Douglas, hoped would tear through the defense's wall of doubt. Hannah's close friends took the stand one by one. A young woman, voice breaking, recalled the birthday party. Hannah was so happy. She showed no signs of anything wrong. When the clock hit 11:30, she waved goodbye, said "see you tomorrow," and left the apartment. That was the last time I saw her. Her words echoed through the room, causing Hannah's mother to collapse into her husband's shoulder, while her father bit his lip, hands clenched. No one in the family could hold back tears as they relived that fateful farewell. After the familiar witnesses, Douglas called a surprising name, Mark Peterson. A middle-aged man, in a dark shirt, stepped forward, his eyes heavy. He admitted this was his first time speaking in court, despite witnessing a key detail in 2007. His voice trembled, but was clear. "That night, I was on the second-floor balcony of the apartment complex, smoking. I saw Derek Coleman standing by a dark SUV, trying to talk to Hannah as she left the party. She looked uncomfortable, then hurried to her car. Coleman got into his vehicle and followed her." The courtroom erupted. Jurors leaned forward, scribbling notes. This was the piece that aligned with the prosecution's evidence. Hannah left the party. Coleman appeared, and GPS data placed his SUV near Patuxent minutes later. Douglas gently asked, "Why didn't you report this to the police then?" Mark sighed, eyes dropping to the floor. "I was scared. Coleman had a reputation for being hot-tempered. I didn't want trouble. And when Hannah went missing, I was even more afraid he'd know I saw something. I stayed silent for 14 years, but I can't stay silent anymore." The defense attorney shot up, voice sharp. "This testimony relies on a 14-year-old memory. Who can guarantee Mr. Peterson isn't mistaken? Who can prove it was my client, not another man with a similar vehicle?" He tried to sow doubt, staring at the jury. But Douglas didn't let him take control. She stepped forward, voice firm. "Mr. Peterson described a dark SUV, the exact type Derek Coleman owned. The timing he saw matches the GPS data, 11:50 p.m. Coleman's vehicle stopped near Patuxent. This isn't a vague memory. This is a critical link confirming the truth." Murmurs rose among the spectators. Many eyes turned to Coleman, who sat still, lips pursed, hands balled into fists. He avoided the jury's gaze, but no one missed the unease on his face. The Miller family trembled. The mother sobbed hearing someone saw her daughter try to avoid Coleman in her final moments. The father, eyes red, whispered, "She wasn't alone. She was followed." The media exploded as the session broke. News outlets ran bold headlines. Witness claims seeing Coleman approach Hannah before she vanished. On social media, the community shared fervently, some angry that Peterson stayed silent so long, others sympathetic to his fear. Regardless, his testimony fueled the fire of justice. As the trial resumed in the afternoon, the defense tried to salvage, claiming the witness was swayed by media or misremembered over time. But the jury seemed less convinced. Their pens moved faster, eyes more focused. They had heard too much about DNA, GPS, and now a living witness confirming Coleman intercepting Hannah. By the end of the second day, the Miller family left the courthouse surrounded by reporters. The mother, crying, said briefly, "My daughter tried to get away, and now, the truth is finally being told." It was a moment no one in the crowd could forget. The moment a late witness's voice became a vivid link, connecting Hannah to her final moments and pulling Derek Coleman closer to an inescapable verdict. On the third day of the trial, the atmosphere in Prince George's County Courthouse grew heavier than ever. Every seat was filled, from reporters to curious residents, all awaiting the direct confrontation between prosecutor Karen Douglas and Coleman's defense attorney. After Mark Peterson's shocking testimony the previous day, the trial seemed to reach a critical juncture. One side sought to cement the truth, the other fought to plant reasonable doubt. Douglas opened, her voice icy, each word striking like a hammer. "You've heard a witness say Derek Coleman followed Hannah as she left the party. You've seen GPS data proving his SUV stopped at the edge of the Patuxent forest when Hannah's phone went offline. And you've seen a 100% DNA match. These aren't three disconnected pieces. They form a complete picture, a picture that points to the perpetrator." On the screen, maps of the GPS route, images of the rotted ropes, and excavation photos appeared, sending a chill through the courtroom. The defense attorney rose, voice sharp. "It's all speculation. A witness appears after 14 years. Human memory isn't a reliable compass. DNA? It could be contaminated, mixed up during storage. And GPS? Who proves my client drove that vehicle that night, not someone else?" He turned to the jury, eyes piercing, seeking the slightest doubt. Douglas countered swiftly, her voice resolute. "We don't live in a world of hypotheticals, we live in a world of evidence. DNA doesn't appear on ropes by chance. Cars don't drive themselves to the Patuxent forest, and Hannah Miller didn't vanish on her own. The only reasonable truth, Derek Coleman killed her." In the audience, the Miller family couldn't hold back tears. The mother sobbed seeing her daughter's tattered clothing on the screen. The father bowed his head, hands trembling. Their muffled cries echoed in the silent courtroom. moving those nearby to tears. Live TV cameras captured it all, and thousands of Maryland families watching felt the weight of each argument. The courtroom air was thick, each breath heavy. Jurors exchanged glances, their faces tense, some scribbled furiously. Others watched Coleman intently, who sat motionless but with hands clenched so tightly they turned white. When the judge struck the gavel to pause the session, the room seemed released from an invisible grip. Spectators spilled out, reporters broadcasting the clash between prosecution and defense is at its peak. One side claims undeniable evidence, the other clings to reasonable doubt. On social media, clips spread rapidly, with many writing, "We're watching justice return after 14 years." In the hearts of everyone, from the Miller family to the Annapolis community, a shared feeling prevailed, breathless tension. And all understood that the final verdict now rested on the belief of the 12 people sitting in the jury box, those who held justice for Hannah Miller in their hands. On the 5th day of the trial, all eyes were fixed on the jury. After 3 days of closed deliberation, they returned, faces tense, hands clutching thick files. The courtroom fell silent, with only the judge's gavel echoing. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreperson stood, voice trembling but firm. "Yes, Your Honor." Everyone held their breath. The foreperson looked directly at the judge and read aloud, "We find the defendant Derek Coleman guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Hannah Miller." The courtroom froze for a second, then erupted in choked sobs. Hannah's mother collapsed into her husband's shoulder, trembling, while her father looked up at the ceiling, tears streaming, but eyes reflecting a mix of relief and pain. Hannah's friends hugged tightly, some sobbing, others whispering. Finally, Coleman sat motionless, his face pale. When the judge pronounced a life sentence without parole, he slumped onto the table, lips muttering incoherent words. His defense attorney placed a hand on his shoulder, but couldn't hide the disappointment. All arguments, all attempts to sow reasonable doubt, were ultimately no match for the weight of DNA, GPS, and witness testimony. In that moment, the courtroom was silent, save for the sound of crying. Then the atmosphere exploded. Scattered applause from the public gallery quickly grew into a tearful ovation. Many Annapolis residents who had followed the case from the start embraced, crying because justice had finally been served. The Miller family stepped out of the courthouse into the arms of friends and dozens of strangers. The mother whispered, "My daughter waited 14 years for this moment. Today, she has justice." Her words brought tears to reporters' eyes as they broadcast live. Outside, a crowd gathered on the stone steps, holding Hannah's photos and handwritten signs, "Justice for Hannah." As news of the verdict spread, communities across Maryland shared in the emotion, a mix of sorrow for an irreparable loss and relief that the darkness had finally lifted. In the courtroom, the empty chair where Hannah might have sat left a haunting void. But that day's verdict turned the silence into a declaration. The man who took her life would never walk free again. Annapolis had never experienced a day like the one when Derek Coleman was convicted. When the news broke that he was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole, the city fell silent for a moment before erupting in an indescribable wave of emotion. Residents were stunned by the truth. The man who killed Hannah Miller wasn't a shadowy stranger, but the one who had lived normally among them for 14 years. He had greeted neighbors, fixed cars, driven his kids to school, bought beer at the familiar convenience store, all under the guise of a decent citizen. The shock stemmed not just from the crime, but from the realization that evil could hide in the most ordinary places. On street corners, conversations buzzed endlessly. "I once let him watch my kid for a few minutes," a young mother said, eyes wide with horror. An elderly man shook his head. "I used to chat with him about my grandson's team." Unbelievable. These small stories spread through the community, sparking both anger and unease. Annapolis saw itself differently. A city thought to be safe had harbored a murderer in its heart. The media dove in. Articles in the Baltimore Sun and local TV stations dissected the 2007 oversights. They highlighted how police missed the GPS data in Coleman's insurance records, evidence that could have cracked the case early. They also pointed out delays in DNA processing due to limited resources and technology, leaving the case cold for over a decade. Long-form reports asked if authorities had been more thorough in 2007. Could Hannah have received justice sooner? In response, the Annapolis Police Department held a press conference. Before dozens of microphones, the chief bowed his head, admitting, "We made mistakes. In 2007, we lacked resources, but that's no excuse. The delay caused the Miller family 14 more years of pain. This is a hard lesson for our department." He pledged to invest more in forensic technology, expand partnerships with private labs, and retrain investigators to ensure no case languished in silence for so long again. This response garnered sympathy from some, but sparked fierce debate. Some saw the admission as a step forward. Others were angry. An apology can't bring Hannah back. On social media, the hashtag #JusticeForHannah spread widely, paired with posts expressing both grief and calls for reform. In criminology and forensic circles, the Coleman case became a textbook example of combining new technology with traditional investigation. Universities held seminars, law and criminal justice students studied every detail for lessons learned. The power of genetic genealogy was emphasized, a tool that revived a case thought forever buried. For the Miller family, the community's shock couldn't erase their private pain. They continued living in their small Annapolis home, Hannah's room untouched as it was 14 years ago. But now, when they looked outside, neighbors stopped by to share, leaving flowers at the door, writing messages on a sign in the yard. "We won't forget Hannah." It was belated comfort, but it showed their daughter's lasting impact on the community. Annapolis would forever recall this case, not just as a horrific crime, but as a wake-up call. That justice may come late, but it must never be forgotten. And that vigilance, courage to speak the truth, and investment in science and investigation are what prevent tragedies from recurring. After Derek Coleman's life sentence without parole, the Miller family stepped out of the courthouse into the community's embrace. The crowd waiting on the Prince George's County Courthouse steps fell silent as Hannah's mother clutched her daughter's framed photo, eyes swollen from crying, but her voice rang clear. "For 14 years we lived in darkness, asking over and over, where did she go, what happened? Today, the truth is finally clear." Her words brought many to tears. For the Millers, justice came too late, but it came. In the days that followed, Annapolis held a memorial for Hannah in the central square. Hundreds gathered, holding candles in the chilly night breeze, their flickering light reflecting on tense, emotional faces. A university choir sang Hannah's favorite hymn. Her father took the podium, voice hoarse but steady, "My daughter is gone, but her story has awakened us." Hannah reminds us that justice must never be forgotten, and truth, though buried, finds its way back. The crowd softly whispered her name, a vow to keep her memory alive. Newspapers published images of the memorial with headlines. "Annapolis lights candles for Hannah Miller. Justice, late but necessary." Commentaries declared the case a symbol of forensic science's power, but also a reminder of society's responsibility. A Baltimore Sun writer penned, "For 14 years, Hannah lay silent under cold earth. But her bones told the truth. Darkness may swallow a voice, but evidence whispers until justice is heard." In the Miller household, pain lingered daily. Hannah's room remained untouched. The floral bedspread, half-marked textbooks, notes still pinned to the wall. The mother told the media, "I can't enter her room without crying. But now I feel lighter, knowing what happened. I can tell her, wherever she is, that her truth was heard." The father quietly placed Hannah's necklace in a glass case in the living room, calling it evidence of hope. Annapolis changed after the case. Schools held talks on personal safety. Forensic technology workshops were invited for students. Many families vowed never to dismiss small details in a disappearance. Hannah's story became a living lesson. The family's persistence, a witness's return, and DNA's power united to pierce the darkness. A memorial plaque for Hannah Miller was erected at the edge of the Patuxent forest, where her remains were found. It read, "Through years, bones still tell the truth." Passers-by stopped, leaving wildflowers and notes vowing not to forget. The plaque was not just a tribute to a 19-year-old lost, but a symbol for all victims of unsolved cases. The memorial closed with hundreds of candles released onto the Chesapeake Bay, their light shimmering on the waves. Residents stood silently, letting the wind and water speak a farewell. In that moment, it was as if the city whispered to Hannah, "Justice came late, but it came." The story of Hannah Miller and the case solved after 14 years carries a powerful message for life in America today. Justice may come late, but it demands the persistence of families, communities, and the strength of forensic science. Hannah vanished in 2007, her silver sedan left on a quiet road, her phone offline, and for over a decade, her case sat cold. If the Miller family hadn't relentlessly kept her memory alive, holding annual vigils and urging public attention, the case might have been forgotten. The first lesson for American society is that victims and families' persistence can drive the justice system to act. The second point to reflect on is DNA and GPS technology. Only when police revisited 2007 GPS data and applied genetic genealogy to the DNA from Hannah's ropes did the truth emerge. In today's America, with many missing person cases still open, the lesson is to invest heavily in investigative technology and private lab partnerships, so no case waits decades for resolution. Finally, Mark Peterson's appearance after 14 years reminds us that silence born of fear can delay justice, while courage to speak can change everything. For Americans, it's a call to trust that every small detail, every individual voice, can be a vital link in securing justice for victims and safety for communities. Thank you for joining us on this journey to find belated justice for Hannah Miller, a story reminding us that truth, though buried, will return. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more cold case stories, and see you in the next video.